Let's back. How did you go from a homeless teenager to this military intelligence?
I grew up as kind of what they call a latchkey kid. It started back when I was even in first grade. At the time, they didn't have a diagnosis of ADHD. You were just a bad kid. The first thing that I know was I could finish high school. I had a job at a grocery store in the afternoon, so if I caught a nap, I caught a nap on the pallets back behind the grocery store. Minimum wage was $3 an hour. So I was trying to work towards going to the Air Force Academy. I wanted to go play baseball for the Air Force Academy. And basically that whole thing, got dashed on the rocks. And the only recruiter that we had that came to the campus was an Army recruiter. I sat down with him. I said, look, this is my situation. Can you help me? And he said, yeah.
This isn't a story about rising to the top. It's about starting at the bottom and choosing to lead anyway. Because when you stop hiding your story, you stop playing small. So if you've ever questioned whether your past disqualifies you, this episode is your answer. So sit back, kick back, and let's get started. For this is the School of Influence. Hey, welcome everybody. I'm your host, Devin Schubert, also known as the Man in Orange, and I'm excited to bring to you this session of the School of Influence. Today's guest is a definition of resilient leadership. Dr. Davis McAlister went from sleeping under stadium bleachers to serving in the U.S. military intelligence, then to becoming a doctor, a best-selling author, and a nationally recognized speaker. He's trained elite athletes, coached winning teams, and now equips leaders from the boardrooms to the classrooms to rise with clarity, character, and courage. He's also the creator of the Interrogator's Guide. He's the host of the Approach podcast and a man who's lived what he teaches. He turned interrogation skills into influence strategies, and now he helps leaders win the battles in front of them by mastering the story behind them. So my friends, help me welcome Dr. Davis. Hey, my friend, welcome to the show. So glad that you're here.
And thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So today we really want to dive into, the purpose of our identity and how the past, how the present, how the future, how all of that kind of plays into it. And so I'm super interested. We've heard a little bit that, you were homeless as a teenager. You were sleeping under stadium bleachers. Let's back. How did you go from a homeless teenager to this military intelligence? Well, pardon the interruption, but let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like your story was meant to impact thousands or millions of lives, but you literally just didn't know where to start? Did you know that there's over 2.9 billion people watching social media every single day? That's literally the biggest stage in the entire world. And yet most people are completely invisible on it. Why? Because they don't know how to tell their story in a way that actually connects to other people. And that, my friends, is exactly why I created Stories to Stages. We help you craft your entire story, professionally edit your video, and then we publish it across all major platforms. Plus, I'm going to give you access to my entire storytelling bootcamp. This is over $25,000 worth of value, but right now you can get the entire thing for just $7. $7. Because this isn't just a course, this is a launching pad. We've helped people with no audience, no experience, finally share their story with confidence and to get real reach. Because your story told in the right way involves and moves people. So go to stories2stages.com and grab your $7 spot with the code of podcast1. Your story was not meant to stay silent. So let's get seen, let's get heard, let's get paid, and let's set people free. So go to stories2stages.com, grab your $7 spot, and use the code podcast1 and get yours today. Now, back to the show.
Yeah. So I kind of have to dive back a little bit before that to kind of lead up to that. So, I grew up as kind of what they call a latchkey kid. So, our parents worked from can to cane. They they would leave at 6 o'clock in the morning. They didn't get home till, sometimes 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. Bedtime was 8:30. And that was the level of our interaction. So we were pretty much responsible for ourselves and raise ourselves. And in the long term of that, though, I mean, it made us a resilient generation because, that's kind of one of the things that people talk about with Gen Xers, where, the latchkey kid generation. I think they also called us the last feral generation. And, but, you become very self-dependent and self-reliant. But, um, during that process also, when you were talking about identity, there was a big struggle that I had going on. So, it started back when I was even in first grade. I had, at the time, they didn't have a diagnosis of ADHD. You were just a bad kid. And so, um, so, you know, I really, really struggled, especially in school. And, I still had that mindset that I could still make good grades, but I couldn't focus. I couldn't concentrate. Um, and at one point in time, they actually tested me because they thought I had mental retardation. And so, it turns out I was exactly the opposite. And then now you're just a smart bad kid. So, but, they, my parents, I didn't just have much of a relationship. You grow up and you take care of yourself. And, even in sports, if I made it to practices or games, it's because I got on my bike and I rode there. And sometimes I would have to ride miles to get there. And so, so you get it, fast forward, you get into high school, and how are most high schools? How are most teenagers? What are they trying to do? They're trying to, further flex their independence. We have that tendency, because there's that generational thing. As a teenager, you think you think you know everything. When you're in your 20s, you know everything. When you're in your 30s, you start to question what you know. By the time you hit my age, 40s and 50s, you just realize I really don't know anything. So I'm just going to. So, um, but you start trying to develop that independence, and it led up to, I had more of a better relationship with my mom, but not my dad. Um, and so, that kind of came to a head when I was in high school. And it got to my senior year of high school. My mom was really, really sick, and she wasn't doing well. And so one night it just kind of came to a head. I didn't handle some things right. My dad didn't handle some things right. But ultimately it was, get out. I'm done, get out. And so, and I still remember the feeling of that door closing behind me. Yeah. And that feeling of what now? Because at that point, I've always been a pretty optimistic, even as a kid, I was pretty optimistic. But, as time kind of clicked on during that period, you start finally getting to a point where, what am I going to do? There's no way out. And so you start questioning whether you even want to stay in this realm anymore. And really that's the only time I've had that issue of thinking like that. But I mean, you think about it, a teenager, your perspective on the world is pretty narrow. So, so, um, so I then went into a survival mode. I'm just like, all right, the first thing that I know that I can do is I could finish high school. So, I had a job at a grocery store in the afternoon. So I would go to the grocery store in the afternoon. I would work. I was able to take on night shifts to where I could work all night. That way I at least had a place to be. And that wasn't every night, but it was at least 3 to 4 nights a week I could do that. Um, if I caught a nap, I caught a nap on the pallets back behind the grocery store. Um, the best times I got to eat during that time period is right when I got paid. That was back when minimum wage was $3 an hour. So it didn't go very far. But I would at least eat decent for a couple days, and then I was back to scrounging food. And even with the grocery store, they would have excess stuff that they would do, but they couldn't give it to me. They said I had to wait till they threw it out, and then I could go get it. And so I would have to go dive in the dumpsters to go, get food. And, I would ride my bike to school, and there's times that I would just sleep on the front of the school step or go to the bleachers that were right next to the school, and I would sleep under the bleachers. And there was one night in particular that I, I couldn't stay at the grocery store, and there wasn't really a place to shelter in, and it was pouring down rain, and I remember just laying under the bleachers at the school and trying to sleep. And little did I know that was going to lend itself to to experience later on when I was in the military. But I would shower in the locker rooms at school, um, and wash my clothes. I had a couple sets of clothes, so I'd wash my clothes and hang them up in my locker, let them dry out. Because I was an athlete, I played baseball and I ran track and did all those things. But leading up to, I was trying to work towards going to the Air Force Academy. I wanted to go play baseball for the Air Force Academy. And basically that whole thing, got dashed on the rocks. Because back then we didn't have internet. There was no internet. There was no email. It was either, what they call snail mail now, or if you had access to a phone, but that was a long distance phone call. And so you had to be able to have a way to pay for a long distance phone call. And so I lost that opportunity. And the only recruiter that we had that came to the campus was an Army recruiter. We didn't have any other recruiters in the area. And so, I sat down with him. I said, look, this is my situation. Can you help me? And he said, yeah. He said, we'll feed you, we'll clothe you, you'll have a place to stay. He said, you may have to sleep outside some more. I said, well, that's okay. At least there's a purpose to it. And, we'll pay you and just do what we tell you to do. I said, sign me up. And so, it was interesting because I was still young enough that my parents had to sign a waiver for me to be able to go. And so he had to go to my parents' house and have them sign a waiver. And then, of course, they got mad about that, but they signed it. And he got it set up to where 10 days after graduation, I left for basic training. Yeah. So it was as soon as he could get me out. And so I just had to survive 10 more days after graduation and find a place to be and make that work. But in my Army situation, I really didn't know what to expect, because you go through this testing. Everybody's familiar with the ASVAB. You take the ASVAB, and you have to determine what your job is going to be based off of what your score is. And I did pretty well. I don't remember my exact score, but I think he said I came pretty close to maxing it out. And he said, do you learn from, how easy is it for you to learn foreign languages? I'm like, I don't know. I took Spanish in high school. Probably would have learned it better if I'd paid attention more. But so they give you a test, and it's a test based on a made up language. And they call it a D-Lab. And so I took that test, and apparently I did really well on it. So they turned around and said, okay, you're going to be a linguist now. We got to figure out what you're going to be a linguist in. And so they started looking at different jobs and military intelligence. And so I started looking through the list. I'm like, what is that? What is that? There was different ones that you could basically sit in a box with a radar dish and have headphones on your head listening to stuff. Or there's some different type of analyst type jobs. And I was like, nah, none of those sound any fun. And he said, we've got this one here. He said, you might like that. I said, what is that? He said, it's an interrogator. I was like, an interrogator? He goes, yeah, like what you see in the movies where you sit down and you question people and, all those things. I'm like, that sounds like fun. I'll do that. So that's what I signed up for. And, I went to Monterey, California to go to language school. My first language was Korean. So for those that don't know, languages are broken up into categories based on the level of difficulty it is for a non-native speaker to learn it. So the only Cat 5 language is English, because there's so many dialects and derivatives of English that, it's really, really difficult for somebody to learn English adequately, depending on where you're at. The next languages after that, the Cat 4 languages, are Arabic and Korean. And so, and at the time, I didn't understand why they didn't push me towards Arabic, because we were right in the middle of the Desert Storm conflict. Um, and so I didn't understand why they didn't push me towards Arabic, but they didn't. They pushed me towards Korean. Maybe they just had more of a need over there. But we were still having conflicts with North Korea, and even throughout my entire military career, North Korea was an issue. So, um, so I ended up going through Korean school. It's a 52-week, intensive school, and then went to Intel school. Became an interrogator, and then during the course of my service, there was another. So that falls into the category of what they call human intelligence, and of course, they say military intelligence is an oxymoron, but there's another aspect of human intelligence that was called counterintelligence, and basically, this is your, for lack of a better term, is basically your spy hunters. They're the ones that are trying to find the spies that are watching us and taking measures to counter what they're doing, and possibly even capturing them and bringing them in for people like me to be able to question them with. So they started doing a cross training because there was entertainment of the idea of taking and combining the two jobs together and just calling it a human intelligence specialist. And so I was part of a group that we started cross training into both job categories. And so I started, and my job, I was embedded with those guys anyway when we had operations units. And so we basically learned each other's jobs, and that way we could function on a multiple level. So but I enjoyed that time. I spent 8 years total in, and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who I was, what I was, who I could be, and getting my self-discipline in place. When you've spent the majority of your life, and this was part of the problems that I had growing up, is that, when you think that your middle name is stupid, it's, that takes a toll on your self-esteem and your self-confidence after a while, you know. So now I'm just a bad, stupid, smart kid. So, but I spent a lot of time being able to try to figure out who I was and what my potential was.
Yeah.
And
What were some of those things that you found in your identity? Like, what did the Army teach you about that identity and responsibility process?
this is the great thing, and this is what I feel like is the biggest benefit about going in the military, is because when you go in, their job, you're isolated for the most part. And I know it's a lot different now because we're in the, technology age, and they even let them have their phones a lot more periodically during basic training now, but we didn't have any of that. You had a 5-minute window on a weekend to be able to make a phone call with your AT&T calling card, and you had to stand in a line waiting on the telephone, and you had 5 minutes to be able to make a phone call. And of course, I didn't really have anybody to call, but um, you spend a lot of time getting broken down, just trying to break you down to the most basic level. There's a reason why they call it basic training. It's not just because they're teaching you the basics of being able to survive in the military. It's breaking you down into the basics of who you are, and then building you back up, into the mold that they need you to be able to do your job. Whether you're going to be a frontline guy, infantry, door kickers, if you're going to eventually go up into the Rangers or special operations, or if you go in the military intelligence, there's so many different jobs, but the job is to build you up, to mold you into the job that you're going to do. And the first thing that I had to learn was self-discipline. And I didn't have a lot of it because, think about it. When you grow up and, you're just raising yourself and you're responsible for your own, existence most of the time. Self-discipline isn't one of the hallmarks of growing up like that. So I would say the very first lesson I learned that was most important was self-discipline. The next one, I started learning lessons of leadership very, very early. I was very blessed to have a really great squad leader in my first unit, and he treated us a little different than the other squad leaders did, because most people think about the military, everybody just stands around yelling at each other, and that's not the case. But there is definitely a hierarchy, of authority, and you're expected to follow that authority. And you have some people are going to gravitate towards what they know. And if all they know is, well, I was brought up being yelled at, so I'm going to yell at you, and you're going to go through the same thing. And I noticed that my squad leader did not do that. He didn't yell at us. He would just tell us, hey, this is what I need you to do, go do it. And that was it. And, now if you chose not to do it, then, there was a difference there. But he didn't just yell at us all the time. But one day I just asked him, I said, because I sat there and watched the other squad leaders, I took notice of it. And they're like, they constantly yelled at their guys all the time. And excuse me, I'm having some allergy stuff today. But I gathered up the courage to ask him. I was like, why don't you yell at us like everybody else does? He goes, I'm going to teach you something that was taught to me when I first came in. He said, this was told to me by my first squad leader. He said, if all I ever do is yell at you, when I have something really important to say, you're not going to hear it because it sounds like everything else I say. And that really resonated with me, because even, growing up, that's all I knew. All I knew was getting yelled at all the time. And so it got to the point where, I don't know if anybody else had this experience, but you're sitting there as a kid and you're getting yelled at, and it's like your dad's head, you started having these, hallucinations that your dad's head's blowing up like a balloon, and, weird stuff like that. That's, you, you, you learn very quickly to just start tuning things out. And so automatically, when I would hear things in that volume, I would automatically just start tuning it out, because that's what, I had trained myself to do. But having that different perspective really cued me in on, okay, I really need to understand leadership better. So I really started pouring myself into studying leadership techniques, and watching the different people that we had in our units, different units that I had, and paying attention to those things. And I would say the biggest eye-opening thing for me was realizing what my potential was. Because I had a point in time early that I had an officer pull me in and said, you know what, you've got a lot of great potential. I would like you to consider, getting your degree and becoming an officer. And we could do some things to put you through and have you become an officer. The problem is that if that offer had come in 2 to 3 years later, it would have made a difference for me. But because of where I was at that moment and the way I saw myself, I couldn't see myself in that position. I didn't believe that I could do that. I didn't feel like that was in the cards for me. And so I turned it down, not knowing that could have been, a game changer for, even the rest of my life from that point, but, fast forward, I worked my way up through the ranks, and as I've worked my way up to become a non-commissioned officer, NCO, I was getting ready to get promoted to sergeant, and I had to go through the U.S. Army Leadership and Development course. We had to go through a leadership school. It was a 4-week school, but that, they teach you the basis of being a leader within the military, but they teach you a lot of leadership principles, and you have to take a lot of tests. There's a lot of physical components to it. And long story short, I ended up graduating first in my class out of 226 other soldiers.
Wow.
And that was that was the, for lack of a better term, breaking point for me. I was like, wow, I can actually do things. I can actually succeed at something. And the thing is, I wasn't even trying to do that. I wasn't trying to be first in my class. I just got in there, just did what I was supposed to do, and studied like I was supposed to, and did well in all my tests that I had, did well in all my drills and stuff that they gave us to do, and because I wanted to be the best at it, and because I focused on just one task at a time and being the best at each one of those tasks, ultimately it ended up, I ended up graduating first in my class, and so that was a huge. I can't even call that a stepping stone because that was such a huge leap for being able to identify who I was and what I was capable of. And I'm like, man, if I'm capable of doing that, what else can I do?
Yeah.
So,
Wow. And so what did that lead into? Like what once you graduated that, what was kind of the next thing that opened up the door for?
yeah, so I got opportunities to move up in the ranks. Became a squad leader, moved my way up. We ended up I ended up at Fort Lewis, and our unit that we had up there. So I'd spent some time overseas first on some deployments, and then ultimately got assigned back in the States up in Fort Lewis, Washington, and was a squad leader up there, and had been a team leader, moved up to squad leader, and then we got notified after a while that our unit was going to be shut down. They were doing some scale backs in the military at the time, and that they were going to shut our unit down. They were going to go ahead and allow people to retire out early that were getting close, and but I still had too much time on my enlistment that I was kind of a free agent, and so. But during that process, my platoon sergeant ended up being the first one that got the early retire out. And so I ended up moving into a platoon sergeant spot, was overseeing all the rest of the troops, just, managed to have that opportunity. They said, hey, we're moving you up to platoon sergeant. And I'm like, awesome. Let's see what we can do. The most of my job was trying to make sure that we found places for everybody to go and everybody had what they need. And I ended up having an opportunity to go get pulled over to another unit, the NCOIC over at a military detachment that was, sending people out with different types of units to be able to go out and do kind of special type stuff. He called me over and said, hey, I want to try to pull you over here. He had to kind of go through some leaps and bounds, managed to pull me over there. And so I had the opportunity to be able to do intel support for a variety of different units, but the one that I was most proud of was we got to work with the special operations unit to be able to provide intel support for those guys. So, and then I did that until I got out, and then I came up the end of my enlistment, and I had to make a decision because of what they were doing to our profession and our job slots. I had to I had to make a decision on whether I was going to stay in or get out. And at the time, they were freezing all of our promotions. I was on the verge of getting promoted again. I had already made my points, had already been picked up, and then they came back and said nobody's getting promoted because we're staring back. And so I'm like, okay, but what if I want to stay in this job? They said it'll be another couple of years before you can be considered for promotion again. They said your other option is to pick another job. And I was like, well, I don't want another job. I like this one. And so basically I made the decision to get out. And it occurred to me at the time, maybe I could just get out, go ahead and get my degree, maybe come back in as an officer or something along those lines. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do yet. But I was kind of kicking that idea around that, I still needed to go to school.
And how old were you at this time?
At that point, I was 25, almost 26. Yeah. And so, I started having to make that decision. And then, we got out and decided to go to school at Mississippi State, went back to Mississippi where I grew up. And I grew up watching Mississippi State football and, said, okay, I'm going to go there. Have no idea what I'm going to major in. And I started in a spring semester, was my first semester. we had actually gone and done a 2-week mission. This is the thing that I think was a little bit of a struggle for me. We had just gone into a conflicted area, had run a 2-week mission out of there doing intel operations, and then came back. And a month and a half later, I was on the college campus,
Mm.
and that was a rough transition, because I'm older than most of the other people on campus. Definitely have a lot more experience than the most of the other people on campus. Um, and I'm sitting there looking around and all these 18, 19-year-old kids, from my perspective, they're kids, even though I was only, just about 6 or 7 years older than them. But I'm like, you guys don't know anything. You're spoiled brats. And, so I started having some issues, a little bit of anger issues with that, and so, uh, at the time I was also a competitive powerlifter. I was doing competitive powerlifting and had been working out. And my organic chemistry lab partner was the starting tight end on the football team. He's like, "Hey, we've got a walk-on tryout coming up. You ought to come out and try out." I'm like, "They're not going to let me come out there. I'm too old." And he said, "No." He said, "There's no age restriction." He said, "As long as you have eligibility, you can come out and play." And it was interesting because during that time, there were several other players that had all been in the military prior and had walked out and ended up. LSU was one of them. They had I think it was a starting quarterback that had been in the military prior. And so I was like, "Yeah, what the heck? I could use a little bit of therapy anyway." And so I ended up going out, doing a walk-on tryout, and they kept me. And so, and I had no aspirations that I was ever going to get to play. I was just using it as, stress relief. I was going to get out there and knock the stew out of, the same age people that were driving me crazy. I could hit them and not get in trouble for it. And, so, what that ultimately ended up leading to was, that experience. Obviously I was on the scout team, in the first year. They call us the tackling dummies or whatever, but again, I didn't care. I get to go hit people. And, then the next year, I managed to work my way out. I was in special teams and got a little bit of play time during some of our other games, and it was more than I ever expected to get. And my second year there, we ended up playing Clemson in the Peach Bowl and won the Peach Bowl, and so I got a bowl ring out of the whole deal. And yeah, um, definitely a unique experience, and um, something that you never know when stuff like that's going to open up doors later on, and it did later on.
Um, yeah, I think that was so the football kind of helped give you a release, but also solidified some more of your identity and responsibility and all of that in the midst of the college. And for those of you listening, it's recognizing that even the most powerful leaders, they don't always start with the comfort that's there. It starts with the clarity in the midst of the chaos. And you don't have to lead, like you don't need the credentials and things in order to lead. What you need is that character. You need that character, and that's kind of what I'm hearing in your identity, your character. Even in the midst of the real struggle, it began to forge, your influence and how you began to stop hiding from your backstory, but you began utilizing it as fuel, moving you forward. Of like, I'm not going to let this hold me back. And so it's recognizing that influence begins with your identity. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. Don't allow anything to stop or limit your expectations of what you can do. And so, as you stepped into college, you stepped out of the military, did you kind of go through like that identity shift type of thing again?
I did. I had to learn to calm myself down. There's a lot of veterans that struggle with this as well. Just trying to, the military is really good about preparing you to do your job for them, but it doesn't do a very good job of putting you back into the civilian world. And so, so as a veteran in school, um, kind of talking about identity, the problem was is finding people that I fit in with. And I've always been okay because partially because of the way I grew up, with the latchkey kid thing. I was always okay being by myself. But the thing that I enjoyed most in the military was the friendships that I had and the people that I served with, and having that, uh, for lack of a better term, I guess, crew. You have your crew that you're with, and those are your guys, and you know that they have your back, and you've got their back, and uh, and when I was in school at Mississippi State, even with the football players, they respected me because of where I'd been, and it was funny. The strength and conditioning coach was a former Marine, and he actually kind of solidified some of that because he would hold me to a higher standard in the strength and conditioning program, but um, it also lent itself to a lot of the players giving me a lot more respect. Even though they called me grandpa because I was the oldest guy on the team, but uh, the next thing that that I had to learn was to learn how to scale that back, and tone it down and say, okay, I've got to figure out how to reintegrate back into society, or this is not going to go well. And so one of the things that I did is I did a little research and found out that there was a national organization, and you could do a fraternity chapter on the college campus for veterans. And so there was a veterans fraternity that was out there. And so I was like, you know what, maybe I could just start one of those on campus, and then I could gather my own friends. If all the guys in the fraternities can go and have their friends, then, I can have my friends too, and we'll be the scariest guys on campus. And so I called the national chapter, or the national organization. They said, yeah, we don't have a chapter down there. We'd love for you to start one. So I ended up starting it, became the founding president for the veterans fraternity there at the Mississippi State. And so managed to gather in within, the first semester. We already had 30 veterans that were in our group. I didn't even know that there were that many veterans in there on campus. And so, yeah. And so, the ROTC, because we had Air Force and Army ROTC on campus as well, and they supported us. It gave us a place to be able to meet and do those things. And so, so that was kind of the next phase of, okay, if I show some initiative, if I show, do some things, create some opportunities, then, then I can accomplish a goal by creating that opportunity. And what I was looking for was, people that were struggling just like I was, and us being able to help each other out through that integration. Because I knew that if I had that kind of struggle coming onto a college campus, there had to be other people that were having the same struggle, and there were, and so we're able to serve a function of group therapy for each other.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So it sounds like, you kind of stepped out of, following in different footsteps and stepping into your own leadership, and owning some things and seeing a need and fulfilling that and doing the best that you can. And I know that you have kind of created this leadership, your own unique leadership framework in the Interrogator's Guide. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like and how that came about.
So the Interrogator's Guide, it's actually, I have 2 books in the series, and it's basically going back and being able to break down the things that I learned as an interrogator, and how do you apply those things to leadership. And a lot of it's just basic leadership principles, but how can I take that and I apply that? The reason that book series came about was a guy that had been mentoring me, a guy named Julian Placino. He was a public speaker and an author, and we sat down and we're having kind of a brainstorming session of what to do to help me, because I really wanted to become a public speaker, and did not really know how to get into that field, and really didn't want to pay somebody $10,000 to $15,000 to teach me how to speak. And so he, was kind enough to take me under his wing for a little while. And then he got so busy he didn't have time anymore. But that's a blessing for him to be able to do that. And he's actually running a radio station now. So, but he said, you've got something in your past, because this was the thing, especially with our generation, when you do stuff in the military, especially because of the job that I had, you're working in a classified world. You don't talk about what you do. You don't share what you do. You don't talk about your military past. Um, you don't even talk about any injuries that you had, those types of things. And so I was still very, very quiet about my military experience. And he said, he said, you've got something on the table that should instantly be able to propel you, into what you want to do. And I was like, what is that? He said, your interrogation background. He goes, how many people have that kind of background? I said, well, probably not a whole lot. Um, he said, no, it's going to do one of two things. He said, it's either going to intrigue people, and people are going to want to, seek knowledge and information from you, or you're going to scare people off. And he was right, because I've done both. So, but, he said, because I had already written a couple of books by that point. He said, you know, why don't you take your military experience? He said, how does that relate to sales and leadership? I was like, oh, wow. I didn't realize that at that point, I had already owned a couple businesses, um, and had sold them off, or, sometimes businesses just fail, despite what we do, especially when the economy crashes. And, so we went through that. And so, he said, why don't you write about that? He said, how does it relate to sales first? And I said, just about everything we do, could translate over into sales techniques. And so that's where the first book came from. It was the Interrogator's Guide to Sales Mastery. And then the follow-up book, I was like, okay, I know I want to do sales, but I really want to focus on leadership. I really want to develop my leadership platform and be able to start taking the things that I've learned and be able to apply it to that. And so, so I sat down and cranked out another book, and I've got a couple more in the pipeline that I'm working on right now. But that's we just released the Interrogator's Guide to Leadership back in December.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I love that you're using, your experiences, your expertise and things to be able to help other people and to be able to build your platform, and in helping other people. And for those of you listening, I hope you recognize that we have to make sure that we're not wasting the scars that we have as our past, the things that have healed, the things that we've been through, but instead turn them into systems, like Dr. Davis has, to be able to serve other people. Because when you learn how to package your story in a way that other people can apply it to their lives, your influence continues to grow. And that's where you're saying, and I know that that's kind of what he was speaking into you. And all of this all comes down to, I didn't hear you say anything about, fancy funnels or templates or scripts or any of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's good to have some things, but you really need just the framework that you've actually forged throughout your own real life. You took what you've been through, you've learned how to apply it into new situations, into leaderships, into things that you're passionate about. And now it's like, okay, what can I do with this to be able to continue to take it to the next level? So tell us a little bit about what's your leadership programs and coaching and speaking. What does it look like now, and kind of what makes you different than other people out there?
Yeah. So, when you look at leadership, there's a lot of leadership schools. Leadership is a huge industry. There's a lot of coaches out there, a lot of information out there, but a lot of what they focus on is, like you said, there's a lot of scripting that goes into it. How do you phrase things, and all those things are good, because you do need to be able to communicate. But really, what it boils down to, leadership is a relationship. And when you're in the military, you're given an authority by your rank. And so when you face opportunities, especially when I got out of the military, those opportunities to be able to be in leadership positions, how do you motivate people when you don't have leverage?
Mhm.
and being able to lead without leverage. And when I say leverage, you know, it's not it's when people go, well, you're going to do it because I told you to. You're going to do it because I said so. You're going to do it because if you don't, I'm going to fire you. So that's leading with leverage. And so I was like, that's not the guy I wanted to be. I had served under people like that, during my military career and other opportunities that I've had, and being an employee at different places. You learn very quickly, what you don't like and what you do like. And so I really tried to pay attention and gather the things that I really liked about the people. What was it about those people that I would do anything for them because they asked me to do it? And it came down to the relationship that they strove to have, even though it's not like necessarily an intimate relationship where you go kick back and have a drink, that type of thing. It's more, um, what is it about them that I want to be able to just go climb a hill for? And that's what I really want to pick apart. That's what I work on and I focus on, is who is the individual, because I very firmly believe that you can accomplish all the things in the world. You can have a wall full of diplomas and awards and all those things, but what people are going to ultimately remember you for is how you treat them.
Mm-hmm.
And I have applied it that way. I applied it to my military career. I was a high school coach for a while. I led my players that way. I got to be a head coach for some powerlifting teams, and I trained my teams that way. I would build up teams that had a reputation of taking small groups and small schools, and I could raise a huge team. And it's because I would build that network and that framework into the team to where it was self-creating. I wouldn't go out and recruit people to come out and be on my powerlifting team. What I would do is I would take the people that wanted to be there and I would develop them, and I expected them to be leaders. And I empowered the seniors to be the leaders of the team, because this is what I would tell them, is that, you have an opportunity. Think about the people that came before you. Think about how they treated you and how do you remember them? Because as we get older, you're going to remember two people. You're going to remember the ones that treated you really, really well and that you really liked, and you're going to remember the ones that didn't treat you very well and that you really couldn't stand. And everybody else in between, they're probably not going to stick out in your mind a whole lot. Mm-hmm. But those two are going to be the ones that stick out. And unfortunately, the majority of people, they're going to remember the negative ones more than they do positive ones, depending on what their experience has been. So you have to really take the time to learn a lot of, not just what do I want to be, what do I not want to be. And so you can always gather learning experiences from both of those sides. And so when I train people, I really focus and break those types of things down, to get them to do a lot of self-analysis. Who are you? How are you leading now? What are you doing now? Are you leading by trying to check a box? Or are you leading because, are you really trying to learn how to be a leader because you really want to have an impact and an influence? And why do you want to have that? And so that's what I do, is I really take people from a psychology standpoint, really break them down. Going back to, I guess, to my interrogation skills, I take people and I want to break them down to be able to get them to their base element and allow them to build themselves back up to be able to be a better leader.
Yeah, I think that's great, and you've put this all together, and I love that leadership is all about relationship. It's truly what it's about. Leadership is about relationship, and it's not focused on the spotlight. And I think that a lot of people, get that mixed up. They maybe get an opportunity to be up front, or they get an opportunity to lead, and they get a little too much pride. It starts to sneak in, or they get a little too much positional leadership, and they forget that it's about the relationship. That is what forms the leadership to a whole nother level. And I love another thing that you kind of brought around, is that this entrepreneurship, this leadership aspect of things, of building business and doing it God's way, and all these things, is is just influence, but with strategy. And so you're bringing this strategy into the influence that you carried in order to build your businesses, in order to build out your leadership, in order to build your relationship. So I absolutely love that. I absolutely love that. So as we bring this to an end, what would you say is like one thing that you want to say to the listeners who maybe have a story or a calling, or they have this passion to lead, but they're stuck in fear, or they feel like their past disqualifies them? What would you like to say to them?
Yeah. So, I guess the key term that people are throwing out where that's concerned in the last couple of years has been imposter syndrome. What, and I have struggled with that. What right do I have to get up and tell somebody how to do something? Because you are going to be your own worst critic. You know all your failures. You know all your shortcomings. You know all the stuff that you take and you try to tuck away and hope that nobody ever sees. Why not take that, leverage that towards our strength of being able to say, hey, look, if I can help you not make the same mistake that I did, if I know that if I was struggling here, there has to be somebody else that's struggling with the same thing. And if I can make their life a little better, then I'm serving a purpose. And so take what you've done, take the failures that you've had and use them as a strength to be able to help others that are going to be able to, be able to learn from you and be able to grow. Because, if you make life all about you, that's all you're ever going to get. And so if you make it about people and helping other people and growing your intent and helping find your purpose and really throwing yourself into something that you're passionate about, that's where you're going to be able to really flourish and shine. And it really doesn't matter, because people try to have a measure of what makes somebody successful. And people either equate it to money or they equate it to a title, those types of things. To me, success is, did you set a goal and did you make it?
Mm.
That's success. If your goal is to get out there and create something that's going to help other people, that's success.
Mm-hmm.
You succeeded in your goal. What my goal right now is I want to expand my level of influence. I want to be able to grow from, being in front of a room of, 50 to maybe 150 people. And I want to be in front of thousands of people, being able to have that level of influence. And so, um, I have a vision. So I had the opportunity to be able to see Zig Ziglar, and he had a tour that they did, and it was called the Motivate series, and they would rent out entire stadiums. And I remember they rented out the American Airlines Stadium down in Dallas, and I just remember they had this huge stage down at the bottom, and this place was packed. I mean, there was thousands of people, and just waiting to listen to what they had to say. And I remember the thing that stood out to me most is that I want to have that level of influence.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to make that impact. I want to be able to do something that when I have the opportunity, I can be able to be on that stage and be able to share and be able to help other people. And it wasn't about the fame. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about money. It was about, I want to have that level of influence, have that many people that have bought into me and what I'm trying to do for them, and, be able to come and do something like that. So yeah, that was tremendous opportunity to be able to do that and to be able to see that. And so it kind of shaped my mind of where I want to go process. So,
Yeah, it all is. It all is. Well, if people want to follow you, people want to check you out, how can they do that so we can grow your influence the best that we can?
all right. I have my website. It's drdavismcallister.com. All my links and resources are on my website. You can reach out to me through email as well at info@drdavismcallister.com. And I also have a YouTube channel. I'm on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook. I have a YouTube channel. It's just Dr. Davis McAlister. And we have a show called The Approach that we bring on people with leadership and problem solving and get them to share their experiences. And so I'd love for you to be able to tune into that and look for updates and new episodes coming out for that too. So
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll have all those in the links down below. And in the show notes, in the description. And, hopefully you guys are encouraged. And you're encouraged by what Dr. Davis, shared with us today, is that influence doesn't come from just avoiding pain all around us. It comes when we decide that we're going to own it and be able to utilize it moving forward. There's so many skills that you can learn when you're actually in that survival mode, and it can become the strategy that you begin to use to scale, just like he did through the military, just like he did through bringing in the what was it in the college? You brought in the military,
Yeah, the veterans fraternity. Yeah.
veterans fraternity, utilizing all those things. And you don't have to wait for someone to actually validate your voice, because if you've lived it, you can now lead with it. And so, Dr. Davis, just thank you for sharing this whole thing. This is basically just like a masterclass on what it looks like for us to be able to turn pain into purpose. We know that's very cliche, but you really did, and you've lived it out. So everybody who's listening out there and watching, stop running from the things that qualify you the most. You get to go and make a difference today. And for those of you that are here today and that are watching from all over the world, go and make an influence like you have never thought that you had before, by living out the identity and the purpose that God created for you. But for today, school is dismissed, but your influence never takes a day off. So stay bold, stay focused, and go and leave your legacy. Bye.